Like a chainsaw tearing through the synthwood-bound door of injustice, we are the unhinged Vox drama writers of rebellion. Here's 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio, coming to you live tonight from the back room of Bulge's Sump Rack City.
I thought the bulge was in my pants.
It's usually where they come from. And it's shaping up to be another beautiful third shift all across the Underhive, with only a nice round 30 dead in the last night's raids. Looks like the damn gone Dagons are at it again, spreading their flavor of mayhem all across the thermostack districts. Our bodies have been called in, but so far all they're doing is holding and containing the violence to the Durham Arcabs.
Shit. I hope they don't stir up the fucking glass heads.
Of all the fucking... Why do we always give you warp powder? It's bad. I don't think you're supposed to sniff it that much.
I don't give him any. He just has it.
Takes it? It's there?
Have it. Sometimes I have to suitcase it, but it's always there.
You got a prison walleted bit?
Got a bottomless shotgun shell of warp dust.
I am your captain for tonight's voyage, the unhinged purveyor of all things plasma Goblin King, joined by my motley crew of discordant divas, starting with the megalomaniacal maestro of mayhem, Marky.
Sex machine.
And the casual connoisseur of the crimson Barbary. Keep those creds and those hearts close and extra secure, ChuckerFly.
Sexual Tyrannosaurus.
And back from his last swashbuckling adventure in the Frost Hollow, it's the Klepto Cruiser, keeping us well stocked in Red Squig, Kev.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Welcome to episode 79 of the Great Crusade, part 4. This is it. We're finally done. And by finally done, I mean we probably could have made this another 4 episodes.
You know, it reminds me of when I was a young lad. We had this thing called the Brahma Run you had to do for football. It was basically like a 5-mile run that you had to do every summer. That's what I feel like right now.
Back when I was a young lad, we had this thing called the Brown Bomber, where you just shit your pants after smoking a lot of Sump weed.
And that's what you feel like now? You're all cleaned out and exhausted from it?
Yeah, now I feel like the bomb of the Brown Bomber.
Oh, God.
I'm spent, guys. And you got to go out and get a really big burrito to recharge, you know what I mean?
You know what's funny is at my work, we had a chili cook-off, and I named my chili the Brown Bomber.
Oof.
Everyone loved it.
Well, yeah.
You didn't pull a, what's his name from fucking... Who's the dude who drops the chili at the chili cook-off in
Kevin.
The Office? Is it Kevin?
Kevin.
Yeah. The trick
See that
is
meme come up a lot.
to put everything in the pot early so that they all get to know each other. But I messed that up, but that's the essence of the line.
To kick it off and jump right in both feet, we're going to start with the Burning of Prospero, which was between 004 and 005 of M31.
Sounds like what happened to somebody's pants.
After one of them burritos. Evidence came to light that the Thousand Sun Space Marine Legion and their Primarch Magnus the Red were violating the Emperor's edicts that he had passed during the Council of Nicaea. In response, the Emperor dispatched the Space Wolves Space Marine Legion, along with elements of the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, to capture and escort Magnus back to Terra, so he and his legion could essentially sit and be judged for the transgression by the Emperor. However, Horus, who had at this point already secretly fallen to the ruinous powers, intercepted the message and, for reasons unknown, convinced Leman Russ to defy the Emperor's orders and seek to execute Magnus and all of his sons. This message was imparted to Leman Russ, the Primarch of the Space Wolves Space Marine Legion, but a message brought to him by the Sons of Horus. So even though they were like Horus's words, it was actually members. It was normal Astartes of the Sons of Horus who brought it to him. Russ and his sons acted with a brutality that couldn't entirely, however, be blamed on Horus's intervention. As we mentioned last episode, animosity had already begun to grow between the legions, with the Thousand Sons and Space Wolves already having fallen into direct conflict on the planet of, and let me pronounce this correctly, Heliosa.
Yeah, that whole thing with the two legions not liking each other. It's pretty interesting, the books, the whole dynamic of it. Because there's even a storyteller guy that ends up in later on, before the Space Marine novels where it's all the
One
little
of the
short stories.
remembrancers.
He's he wasn't. I don't think he was originally a remembrancer, but he was like a spy that Horus got and had put in with the wolves. That was basically somebody was able to see and hear things that Russ and the wolves were doing and had bad information for a lot of the stuff.
Yeah, well, and that's essentially what happened here. Horus worked through agents of the Sons of Horus who were embedded with the Space Wolves to make sure that the message got kind of garbled. And capture became kill. Because, you just changed the C to a K. And
Yep.
Yeah.
Space Wolves can't read anyway, so...
Right?
Like my favorite meme of I think of the cartoons called Arnold or something with the Aardvark dude. Arthur, right?
Arnold
the
is football head kid.
Got you. And then the outside of the door says something about like
He's
something,
like,
something.
oh, don't worry,
Space
I
Wolves.
can't read.
Yeah, and then the little kid's like, I would be really offended if I could read, or whatever, or that would stop me if I could read. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's a Space Wolves. In many ways, the events that led up to this conflict shaped the future of the Golden Throne and the Imperium. Understanding what Magnus did and what his intentions were, exploring how the Chaos Gods and Horus manipulated events is kind of key to understanding the coming heresy and the state of things in Warhammer 40k, or in the 42nd millennium, where the game currently is. If the fall of Monarchia was step one on the path, and the wounding of Horus was a pretty big step too, the burning of Prospero would be the third and probably final step of kind of pushing everything well into careening completely off the rails. Magnus the Red was the most powerful psyker of all the Primarchs, and after the scattering, his gestation capsule had come to the civilized world of Prospero. For its part, unlike most of the human worlds across the galaxy, Prospero embraced those with psychic mutations. Most human worlds, even before coming into contact with the Imperium, viewed psychers and mutants as extremely dangerous, imprisoning, executing, or exiling those who showed signs within their societies. So it was that when Magnus fell from the sky to the surface of Prospero, instead of being exiled, he was embraced, and his gifts were too. He was celebrated. And as we have touched on with the other Primarchs we've covered, as he grew into his full power, he first outstripped his teachers and mentors and then became the leader of the entire world.
So was he Magnus the Red from the get-go, or that's after he fell to chaos?
No, he always kind of had like reddish skin.
Red tint to him.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when we cover Magnus as a Primarch, when he gets his own episode, because each of the Primarchs we'll get a little bit more into why his skin's red, why he's missing an eye. And
He's
it's not
missing
like
an eye?
Yeah, he only has one eye.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
I mean,
So he's got a third.
Now.
Yeah,
God blessed him with the third.
yeah, he's missing an eyeball.
Blessed
one
him
of
with
them.
with the spare.
Yeah, he's missing an eye.
Yeah, are we talking his brown eye? Like, what are we talking? Kev?
One of the regular eyeballs.
One of his regular eyes. I think it's his left eye. His left eye is missing from an earlier fight.
That's when you see the artwork and stuff of him. He either looks like he's squinting or he's got like a gold eye patch.
Or he's got a scar running down his face, and his eye, and one of his eyes
You
is
said
either completely gone or scarred out.
But Kev said he had a third eye.
Yeah, he's got an eye in his palm.
Was that always a thing?
No, that's a demon thing.
Oh, okay.
That's a demon manifestation.
Matt Dame?
Matt Damon.
So in the when the Emperor reunited with Magnus and Prospero was brought into the Imperium, he warned his son of the dangers inherited in the practice of psychic sorcery. In fact, knowing how powerful Magnus was, the Emperor believed it was more dangerous to leave him in the same ignorance that he had enforced among the other Primarchs and the citizens of the growing Imperium. So unlike we've touched on in the past, where like the Emperor probably should have let Logar in on the secret and Horus in on the secret too, it probably would have stopped some of the shit that happened. When he got to Magnus, he was like, I have to tell this guy. This guy knows too much for me to lie to him.
He already knows. I can't say it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Because of this, Magnus was shown the truth behind the warp, and the Emperor explained the horrible creatures and malign intelligence that resided within. But Magnus had already peered deep into the warp, and had at that point believed he already knew far more about it than the Emperor. Even in revealing more to Magnus than he had to any of the others, the Emperor still basically only told Magnus about 1/10 of what was actually there. And Magnus had so much experience that he didn't fall for the Emperor's shenanigans. He was basically like, okay, if this is all you know, then I know way more than you do, so I'm safer. So even in revealing it to Magnus, the Emperor worked against himself. He knew Magnus knew way more than anybody else, and he still tried to keep stuff from Magnus. And instead of Magnus going, oh, he's lying to me and keeping stuff from me, Magnus was like, I'm obviously way smarter. The Emperor fucked up again. And like, this is a theme. Each time he should have said something, he doesn't. Regardless of all of this, Magnus acted shocked and agreed to renounce sorcery and lead his people away from their study of the occult. But he secretly dismissed these warnings. And again, as a mix of what he knew and the half-truths and lies that he felt he was being fed.
The Emperor just stays fucking up, man.
Yeah.
Perpetual state of fucking up.
I'm sorry, but he's I maybe I didn't make this clear. The Emperor is the best unto God. Did I not say that yet?
He's a perpetual, all right?
Yes.
Perpetual fucking liar.
We haven't even brought up the Thunder Warriors and Marky's on it already.
Well, I mean,
It goes unsaid.
we'll leave that one alone.
So when Magnus was reunited with the Imperium, he was also reunited with his Legion. And much like the others that we've covered, the 15th Legion Thousand Sons shared a lot with their Primarch, that who they would come to know as their gene sire. They had inherited the same psychic powers and raw talent. However, their gene seed was extremely unstable and carried within it a mutation known as the flesh change. The downward spiral of this emergent mutation ultimately would reduce the Thousand Sons Astartes to mindless mutant abominations that were about as close to Chaos Spawn as you can get without being a Chaos Spawn. Because of this, those affected by this were placed in stasis by the Legion in hopes that someday in the future, the steps towards a cure could be unlocked. Unlike many of the other Terran-born Astartes, this wasn't something that came from or got worse after they had been reunited with their Primarch, and some of the Imperium had even suggested to the Emperor that he declare them hopelessly lost and kill the entire line and remove them from the Crusade entirely before Magnus had been discovered. Their numbers had dwindled so low by the time they were united with Magnus, only about 1,000 were left for active duty. These would be very literally Magnus's 1,000 sons. After reunification with their Primarch by means lost to legend, Magnus was able to use his knowledge to stop the mutations and even save many of those who were stored in stasis, returning the 15th Legion to full strength once again. They quickly adopted Prospero as their homeworld, and just like the other Primarchs, Magnus's primary followers were natives drawn from Prospero, and that became the pool from which new Astartes were pulled.
I didn't know they were that fucked up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were at risk of becoming the third Legion that was completely struck from record.
Yeah. And I mean, after they fell, didn't they just become like
Dust.
mummies? I know we'll talk about it, but
That's
we
some
won't-
other stuff.
We won't talk about it in this episode because we already are spending a lot of time on the burning of Prospero because we there's a lot of shit here. But when Magnus became a demon, the spell that Tzeentch had taught him subtly, because Tzeentch had basically been manipulating Magnus ever since Magnus was a kid, that Tzeentch gave him the power to stop the flesh change. And when Magnus became a demon Primarch, that spell became undone. And in an attempt to save his battle brothers, Archimonde cast another spell using the Book of Magnus that basically bound them within their armor in hopes that that would stop the flesh change. What that actually did was the ones that he cast it on got stuck in their armor and became dust. So their suits of armor are essentially like powered by ghosts, by the ghost of what they once were, essentially.
yeah,
But-
and like not all of them are dust, right? Like the stronger
No,
psychers
it was
stayed.
the strong psychers, I believe, stayed regular.
Yeah, stronger, those that were stronger in psychic powers and those that weren't affected by the flesh. Like if you weren't affected by the flesh change, this didn't happen to you. It didn't matter. You could be a weak psyker and not be affected by the flesh change, and you're still just a 1,000 Sun Marine who can shoot a gun. Whenever you look at an infection rate, 10% of the population is always immune no matter what. That 10% survived both events.
Huh.
But yeah, we will get much deeper into that in a future episode. With a culture that embraced occult knowledge, his own triumphs in saving his legion, and their very genetics, both the Primarch and the Legion secretly continued to embrace sorcery. And to their credit, it served them well, and they became a potent weapon in the battles that they fought during the Great Crusade. In fact, it's them that are the reason that the librarians existed in lots of the other legions in the Great Crusade. They were basically teaching people how to safely use a lot of these powers. In a lot of ways, the 15th Legion and Magnus viewed knowledge as power, and they could very literally show it. They knew what was out there, and they believed that understanding this enemy was the best defense. This actually falls into an old fantasy trope as well. There is a line that the powerful and knowledgeable sage or lore master always has to walk. They've got to walk this thing between being a teacher, mentor, and master, or something where the power that corrupts can corrupt absolutely. It's that old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And, you know, the differences that we can pull from different media are Merlin is a teacher, a master, and a mentor who walks that line of ultimate power. And Emperor Palpatine or Senator Palpatine is the opposite. Senator Palpatine has the power, he has the knowledge, and it corrupts him. So there's that line, and it's I pulled an obvious fantasy character and a not so obvious fantasy character, but they're both fantasy characters. They both serve the same position in that sort of story, that teacher mentor role.
Doesn't this kind of trump in a way what you were saying, how if the Emperor would have told everybody how to defend themselves against the forces of chaos, they'd be able to actually defend themselves against the forces of chaos? And this is what Magnus and his people did, yet they fell to chaos.
It doesn't necessarily work, though, as like a trump card or an instant win, though, because you're dealing with just Magnus. If Dorn knew, and if Lion knew, and if Russ knew, and if, like, pick all of the good guys, all of the guys who didn't fall, if they all knew what was out there and none of them had psychic abilities or fought psychic warfare, they would have been better prepared to defend themselves.
Yeah, but if they did know, wouldn't it be the same thing as Magnus? I mean, they all started as good guys, right? So, like, if they did know, wouldn't they fall like Magnus?
And that's the big argument. And the only, I guess, counter argument to that is Magnus was manipulated by Tzeentch when Magnus was like 5.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
Magnus was probably he was loyal to the Emperor, but he was already essentially on his path to demonhood well before anybody found him.
Tzeentch dibbed that one when he was still in the test tube.
Wasn't he also deemed like one of the most powerful Primarchs?
Yeah.
He's physically the largest, and he is the most psychically powerful.
Yeah, he's like the third or second. He's the third most powerful psyker in the Imperium. Or he was. He's not anymore, because he's not in the Imperium.
Because it was the Emperor, and then it was
Alcador,
and then Magnus.
And Magnus had a part to play in the Webway project and with the Golden Throne.
Yeah, the Golden Throne.
He was supposed to sit on the Golden Throne and basically be the warden to the human Webway. That's why he was created. He was created to be a psychic weapon.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of my argument, though, is like if he was the most psychically powerful and was good, and he knew about the forces of chaos, but he still fell, wouldn't all the other Primarchs also fall then if they...
He fell because of a set of circumstances as well. There was a whole lot
there's
of
other facts
set up to it.
There's a lot of really dark and bad shit about to happen.
Yeah. Ryan's going to touch on a lot of it, but the key thing you got to remember that gets revealed in the novel, Tzeentch has basically been at his side.
Grooming
since he was like 2 or 3 years old.
Grooming. Yeah. Since he got out of the tube, Tzeentch was there.
Regardless of their prowess in battle and those they had saved with it, not all the Primarchs trusted them. Chiefly Leman Russ of the Space Wolves, Mortarion of the Death Guard, and Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard could never bring themselves to fully trust Magnus or his legion's powers. Russ was a product of a barbarian culture on the planet of Fenris, where witches were feared and condemned, and he quickly viewed the Thousand Sons as witches. But rune priests aren't witches.
They're not.
Literally, they are.
They're rune priests. They're not librarians. They don't go in the warp. They go in something else.
They literally use the warp under a different name. It's the same thing. Yes, they do. They totally do.
Oh my god, they go in their own place.
What is that saying? If you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig.
Well, I mean,
Space Wolves are just over there putting lipstick on Tzeentch and being like, it's totally different.
Sexy pig.
That's a sexy pig. Mortarion openly accused Magnus of foul sorcery, again drawing parallels between the powers displayed in the events in his own life back on his homeworld. And Corax, on 2 occasions, flat out refused to field his legion next to the 15th. Don't really know more about why Corax didn't like him, just Corax didn't like him.
So they didn't like them because they were psychically gifted, essentially?
Basically. They all had reasons to dislike the fact that Magnus's legion could use psychic powers. And the Space
whole
Wolves...
legion.
Isn't the Emperor a psyker, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
that's different.
That?
But
That's different.
Because the Emperor's not running around with little familiars at his side from the warp.
Were they doing that?
Yes.
Some of them were. More of it was like, a lot more of it is D&D spells. Like, think a frontline wizard in D&D. Chain lightning, fireball. That's what
using
the
bolters.
Thousand Sons were doing. They were turning the tide of war by being incredibly proficient mages, which the Emperor kind of designed them to be.
So why would they not like them if that was the case?
Because the Space Wolves totally don't use psychers. Rune priests are not psychers. They're completely different. They're not librarians. We gave them a different name, so they're not the same.
So anybody who was psychically inclined in any other chapter or legion pretty much kept it to themselves?
No. It's back to the whole thing, like how we talked about, was it the Age of Strife? I forget which age it was, but it's like when all the psychers in ancient human history like turn on humanity and the mutants and the whole thing and all that wars happen. It's like a stigma that has stayed in the human culture where there's parts of humanity that are like, you know what? You can blow shit up with your mind. I don't mind you. You know, it's fine. It's your weapon. Where other parts of the culture are like, fuck that. You're a fucking heretic. You need to fucking burn.
Wouldn't that part of the culture die out because the Emperor is a psychic? And he probably would have killed them if he didn't.
No, because think about how it's treated in the 41st Mage. And think about the Sisters of Battle and their miracles in very, very heavy air quotes. And then the psychic powers displayed by pretty much every other race. The Sisters of Battle are 100% nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Like, that's their entire thing. Burn the witch, burn the heretic, burn the sorcerer, burn the psyker. However, miracles are warp powers. Miracles are psychic sorcery. They're just put it in trappings that allow them to lie to themselves and say that it's not. And that's the same thing that Russ is doing. 100%. The rune priests are librarians. They are using psychic powers. They've just put it into a context which allows them to pretend that they're not.
It's something else. My belief says it's different.
Why didn't Magnus just be like, well, my belief says that this is, fantasy magic, not warp fuckery.
And that's exactly what Prospero did. Prospero saw it as essentially fantasy magic, not warp fuckery.
But people didn't believe them?
Right, because to everybody else, and again, think back to like the way that our own culture works. Anyone who plays a D&D sorcerer, if they were in the actual 16th century of our culture, of our real
burn
world,
them at the stake,
and they were able to do that, they'd be burned at the stake for being different. Because that's the parallel that the storytelling is really trying to draw, is that a lot of people were executed and burned at the stake for the fact that they knew which medicine screw in their backyard would make your headache go away.
Ryan's going to touch on this a little bit in the next thing.
All right, I'll let you move on, but I'm not agreeing with the situation of them not liking him because of warp fuckery when they all have warp fuckery, and the Emperor is warp fuckery.
Yeah, it's all, and that's actually the argument that Magnus made during the Council of Nicaea.
Yep.
Magnus did nothing wrong. Isn't that a saying?
That is a saying.
Yeah. I'm starting to see it.
Without turning this into an episode on Magnus and the Thousand Sons, don't worry, that will happen. The Thousand Sons weren't alone in their ability to use psychic powers, but they were the ones that were most affected by the Council of Nicaea. Magnus argued that the Librarian Order needed to be preserved, placing its importance next to that of the Navigator Houses and the Astropathica. The Navigator Houses and the Astropathica kind of got a pass because they were old noble houses that the Emperor needed on his side in order to win the war. That's it. It was politically advantageous to keep them on his side and not have to fight them. Plus,
I mean, it's kind of like the Mechanicus was allowed semi-autonomy based on the same reason.
And religion. And again, you need the navigators and you need the Astropathica for communication and for transportation. They're way too embedded in society to go away. And Magnus was basically saying, yeah, so are we. But he was bitterly disappointed, as the edicts of Nicaea was incredibly clear. Magnus was to stop all use of sorcery and psychic powers under pain of death. Furthermore, Magnus, like Logar, had been publicly censored. He had no intention of setting aside his pursuit of knowledge, however, and he gathered his chief librarians to him, persuading them to join his plan to secretly practice and continue to gather and study occult knowledge. Following the council, Magnus issued a recall order for the entire legion to return to Prospero. The majority were either already near or on the world and were present during the fall. For those who weren't and remained untainted by the events of the fall, such as Captain Mene Caliston of the Fourth Fellowship, not much is known. Their fates were either lost or purposely struck from all imperial record.
Again, like how they described that whole I forget the council, the edict, when all that got decided. It's literally like Ryan and Kevin were just saying. You need the psychers, you need the navigators, you also need the Imperial Army. And like the biggest opponents were were normal humans that couldn't do psychic abilities, and they were like they wrote it in the novel. Like you have generals in the Crusades are like, I'm done if this keeps happening.
This is bullshit.
There were guys that were like, look, I've got all of my men, and I want to send them against those guys and have them die almost to a guy because I need another medal for my chest. And Magnus was like, well, why? I just turned the entire floor into lava underneath the enemy army. And instead of those generals being like,
that's a great weapon, they feel, I'm going to be replaced.
Yeah, exactly. They don't think of the next 4 worlds that can be conquered. They go, oh, I got past, my glory was taken here.
So there's a lot of jealousy going on. Yeah, between Magnus and
it's like, imagine how it's actually a good analogy. It's how the Navy felt after nuclear bombs. The Navy, there was this like weird thing. It was the Admiral's Revolt, and they were like, well, if the country's going to invest in nuclear weapons, then we're all just going to retire, because you literally made the Navy undoable. You can't Navy in the world where nuclear weapons are planned on going off. It's just not a thing. And so the entire basically U.S. Navy was just like, we're not playing the nuclear game. Find a way to make the Navy work. And it's the same idea.
Okay.
It all has its roots in like actual historical event. Like a lot of the stuff that happens around Magnus is like ripped almost directly from the witch hunts.
Wasn't there a Nicaea? It was just spelled a little differently in real life.
So we mentioned this last episode. There was a Council of Nicaea that was held in like the 200s or 300s in the, I believe, Holy Roman Empire, so the Eastern Roman Empire. And it was basically a council that was held so that the people who controlled what would become Christianity could decide on the rules that made up the religion of Christianity. Essentially, the Council of Nicaea, as far as a real world historical event, was when they decided that, yes, Jesus was a person. Yes, these things happened. Yes, Jesus is God. Okay. They had a meeting to decide that. And my brain for some reason thought it was the conference where Istanbul lost its name and became Constantinople. But Chalk, who I said was going to correct me, messaged me and was like,
called you on that too. I would have been like, I just feel like it's not that. I knew it was something religious. I just couldn't remember what it was.
I knew where it took place, and I knew about when it took place, and I think I told these guys, I'm like, I don't really remember what it was about. I'm like, I'm gonna get it horribly wrong. But yeah, essentially the real world
Shout out
version.
To Chalk for also being a huge history nerd.
Yeah, for fact checking us.
So the other thing you gotta remember too, Marky, is when this council happened, everyone had to sideline their librarians.
Yeah,
but
didn't one of them like turn into a whatchamajiggy Like while this was all going down too. Like didn't one of them like turn into a warp chicken?
You know, as I gain this knowledge of the history of 30k and 40k, it's very easy to be like, man, fuck the Imperium.
Oh yeah, the Imperium.
Yes.
Well,
but at the same time, imagine the glorious dream that the Imperium was supposed to be.
That was happening.
yeah.
It was
almost happened.
happening. Like it was so close to happening. And so it was very easy to believe the dream. And then all of a sudden, a dude that may or may not have a tentacle for an arm is like, you know, you should be on my team instead. It's kind of weird to believe that people believe that shit too.
You know,
And it wasn't just sidelined. It was depending on the Legion. So the Fists basically said, "You're done. You're gonna go in this little cell."
Yeah, they all had to go. They basically all had to go. I said pray last episode. That it was the incorrect word. They all had to go and meditate to control their psychic powers.
So then a lot of them, on some of the legions, they're like, okay, you're not going to use your stuff. You're basically going to be like a captain. You're still going to hold your honors and everything, but you can't.
That is not what happened.
There are chapters that kept them, that still kept them in.
By the edict, they were supposed to be stripped of their honors, stripped of their rank, and busted back down to a simple bolter holder.
Well, yeah.
We talked about it. Like that was, and a lot of legions
do that.
Yeah. And a lot of legions followed the letter to the law. And these guys who had been honored captains were basically busted down to privates. The council caused a lot of problems. It probably fixed a couple, but it caused a lot.
it's times like this where I'm like, man, let the Tyranids just eat whole
everything.
Fucking galaxy.
But that's the thing. I mean, none of the races in Warhammer are written as the good guy.
I mean, Tyranids and orcs are very good. Like, Tyranids just hungry, and orcs just want to live. Yeah, orcs just want to have fun.
Orcs just want to have fun.
When we get around to covering the Stormcast in the Under the Realms series, that'll kind of be the first time that there's actually kind of quasi, and they're not even really good guys. They're just kind of good guys. The more I learn about the Stormcasts, the more I cry.
What you're telling me is orcs just want to fight with somebody.
Yeah, and Tyranids just want to eat. I feel like the Tyranids and orcs just need to, 50-50 on the galaxy, and everybody else just needs to get wiped out. Because I don't think Chaos should win either.
The problem is the couple of times the orcs and the Tyranids have 50-50'd, it's been really bad.
For everyone else.
You get really big angry Tyranids and really big angry orcs.
Exactly.
I don't have enough raid.
The other takeaway that you should probably be starting to build a little bit, Marky, is that every single time a law or a rule or an edict is passed in the Imperium,
it ends up being bad.
Either during the Emperor's reign or after the Emperor's reign, literally the Space Wolves are like, well, we can't read, so we're not following that rule.
That's definitely a reoccurring theme. Literally everything. Can't have psychers, but rune priests are psychers.
Yeah, we don't have psychers. We don't know what you're talking about. You can't have a legion anymore. You need to split it up into multiple chapters. Yeah, we're not doing that.
It's not a legion. It's just the Space Wolves.
It's just every single time the Space Wolves are told to do something.
We just are Space Wolves. It's not even a legion. It's just our name. Welcome to Space Wolves. We love you.
It was during this time, after the council, but before the burning of Prospero, that Horus was wounded on Davin's moon by Eugen Temba and the Kinnebrek Anathame. While meditating back on Prospero, Magnus peered deep into the warp. It was then that Magnus saw the pact the ruinous powers were making with Horus in exchange for saving the War Master's life, and where Magnus saw a glimpse of the terrible future events that were to come, not only of the heresy, but of the Imperium to come after it, seeing which Primarchs would fall from grace and what atrocities the Astartes would commit against one another and then on the general public. The only fate that was hidden from Magnus during this time was his own. Burdened with this terrible foresight, Magnus gathered the most powerful of his secret cabal of librarians, and they decided, after a very long deliberation, that a message had to be delivered to the Emperor, regardless of the cost and as quickly as possible. Magnus risked further censure by violating the edicts of Nicaea and put into place a spell that would be powerful enough and draw deeply on the powers of the warp to get through all the protections and wards that had been placed around the Imperial Palace. There basically wasn't a subtle way for him to do this. This required a brute force attack or a brute force punch. He had to punch through everything with as much power as the Thousand Sons could call from all of their most potent psychers to make it through the wards. And they did it. They were able to break through everything, and they immediately filled the Emperor's brain with Magnus's direct vision. It was a warning that revealed the coming heresy and the corruption that Horus was bringing to the galaxy. However, the spell pissed the Emperor off so much for a couple of reasons. One, they disturbed the wards which had been placed around his secret project for the Webway and the Golden Throne. And the instantaneous effect was that hundreds of Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests and servitors died as they were exposed suddenly to the perils of the warp.
They were not prepared.
It also breached part of the Webway. Demons spilled into the Webway, and the custodes had to start fighting at the gate to
the
keep it
Golden
closed.
Throne.
Well, shit happens. You don't let me use my psychic powers. I see something that is really bad. That is at the what's the cost of a couple servitors that you don't give a shit about, and some admech that nobody likes. Sorry, admech players. To let the Emperor know that the end is near. Like
it wasn't just that. He busted open the Webway into the Golden Throne Room.
And the reason that he
that's
did
what the
that...
custodes are for.
Demons
That's what the custodes are for.
started flooding.
That's what the
Holy Terra.
Okay.
And the problem
That's
there,
what-
Chuck, is that happened because Magnus didn't know about the Webway or the Golden Throne because the Emperor was hiding it from everybody.
Let's
Wait,
just for a
what-
moment step into the scene of the reality of that.
Let's do that,
world.
Chuck. How what were the custodes doing at the time?
Hold on. Just step into
Answer the question, Chuck.
Step into the reality of that world.
Answer the
Did
question.
they have
Chuck.
warp travel?
No, not at the time.
Oh no, nobody had warp travel at the time.
Right.
So you couldn't get on a ship
And send a message, right?
and send a message, or go on a ship and travel.
It would take too long.
The reason they decided not to do that is because it could potentially take too long for the message to reach that
Thank
way.
you, Ryan.
Because
And the reason that they
listening to Zinch, that's why.
and the reason they didn't do it through the okay, so
There,
in an effort not to spend an episode talking about what happened during the lead up to the Burning of Prospero, an episode on the Burning of Prospero, and an episode on what happened after the Burning of Prospero, I took like almost a 600-page book, Chuck, and made it into a paragraph, and you're basing your argument on it. Chuck is like, Ryan explained it quickly. I'm going to tear it apart.
I don't know. I think Magnus did the right thing.
That meeting that he had...
I totally will agree in the fact that his heart
was in the right place. Absolutely.
place.
Yes.
His method, wrong.
A little flawed.
No.
There were unforeseen consequences to his actions because he did not have all of the knowledge he needed to do what he was trying to do.
What is the alternative?
So let me ask you something.
No. Answer my question.
The alternative, do it the right way.
Which would have taken too long and would have been all for nothing.
How long was it take? You could have
Allegedly.
been there in a week. Could have been there in a month.
No,
Could have been there in a year.
Yeah, and that was the problem. It could be a couple of years, or it could be that Magnus knew that warp travel was
Sketchy.
basically that there was this big.
So let me ask you this:
There is this big conversation that took place over a period of time, and not like a couple of hours. We're talking like a couple of weeks, where all of these librarians and all of these high scholars of Prospero and Magnus essentially tried to figure out how to get a message to the Emperor quickly in a way that would be as
during
safe
that
as
time,
possible.
They could have had somebody on that way already.
And they did dispatch somebody to do it the slow mode as
let me-
well.
Let me ask you this:
Yes.
so
And didn't that guy not make it?
you have a child
Yeah, he disappeared.
that has a cell phone.
And what I was going to say is, no matter what,
You're in
Sneech
your room
was going to take
with
that
your
and
door
fuck it.
locked.
Yeah.
For various reasons, because you're an adult. What would be better? Your child text you a message on the phone that you'll answer, or your kid to kick the goddamn door down and rush into, a Chef Boyardee moment.
So here's where Chuck's entire analogy falls completely a fuck apart. Chuck's saying that Magnus should have walked calmly to the door and knocked on it, and what Magnus did was send a text message. So Chuck is saying, do you want a text message
as a father,
or somebody to kick in the door?
If someone kicked the door down?
Yeah.
All right, so let's say, because there's a couple other things we have to add to this analogy. One, our son or our child has basically seen
the theoretical love child of everybody on the cast. Got it. Okay.
Yes.
This is a weird genetic baby.
So this weird genetic baby, let's say
it's a product of Sump Fist.
Let's say dropped a pot of hot water on his younger sibling, or saw his younger sibling about to drop a pot of hot water on their face. Should I go calmly walk over to the door where my parents are bumping uglies and knock and be like, hey, something's about to happen? Or should I go over there and drop kick the door open and be like, they're about to fucking look like...
Well, first of all, the kids shouldn't be playing with hot water, and who left the hot pot of water on the stove?
The Emperor, because he didn't tell anybody how to take care of it.
Well, zombies. Okay, here you go. Here you go. I'm gonna put the actual stakes into it. The zombie apocalypse has happened. Zombies have broken in through the front door, and the kids are freaking out and trying to get away from the zombies. Do they run and try to get into their parents' room by any means possible, or do they calmly send a text message?
Well, before the zombies break in, they see the zombies in the window headed towards the house.
Right. They know it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yes, because it's not instant threat, but it's imminent threat, right?
But
it will happen, but they don't know when.
But if I can adopt Chuck's stance here and Chuck's counter argument, who let the zombies happen? It's really their fault, and they shouldn't have let the zombies happen.
It's the parents, because they voted for whatever president that released the zombie virus. It all goes back to the Emperor.
All roads point to one man. So while Magnus had felt that this warning delivered in the fastest way possible was one, his only choice, again, there was a big conversation, and two, the final proof he needed to prove to the Emperor that his sorcery was useful, it in fact only managed to enrage the Emperor. The Webway project was damaged and the Imperial Palace was exposed. The Emperor was further enraged by the fact that Magnus had obviously lied and not set aside his or his legion's practice of the use of sorcery. And he chose to completely ignore the contents of Magnus's warning, which the Emperor chose to justify as being fabricated by the ruinous powers. He knew that there was a really good chance that that was a real warning and it was really happening, but he chose to justify it out as being a lie. In response, the Emperor called on Leman Russ, commanding him to travel to Prospero and capture the rebel Primarch and his legion and bring them back to Terra. This capture was to be swift, and the Space Wolves were to show no mercy in their actions, as Magnus had directly violated the Emperor's edicts. And this is that weirdness in language that kind of allowed Horus to squeeze in and change it. To be clear, showing no mercy in a capture action and slaughtering an entire population before burning the world are not the same thing. The Emperor understood that there would be some fighting, and he needed it to be quelled swiftly, but that's different from kill them all and let God sort them out, which is the message that Russ got, essentially. To sum it up quickly.
Well, he can't read, you know?
Yeah.
He got the flyer to the tree outs, and he just...
the tree outs!
I mean, he already slaughtered one legion before, so what's different now?
No, he hasn't slaughtered legion yet.
I'm sorry. Allegedly,
which legion did he slaughter? Oh, is there some fan theory out there that
There's
Russ
a bunch
killed
of
the
fan
second?
theories that left Russ and
no, it's in
Russ
it kind of leans heavy on how you read it in the novels.
That Russ slaughtered one of the other legions?
Yes.
I mean, they call him the Executioner before Magnus I think is part
Right,
of why.
but that's I kind of took that as because Russ had been set to deal with shit like the Imperial Army fucking up.
In the novels, it talks about the Warhounds and the Wolves, and they were both designed for specific reasons.
Yeah, they were both designed to enforce brutally. But that doesn't necessarily mean against other Astartes legions. That could very well be against a planet or a entire sector that's fucking up.
Like I said, it's been a while since I read them, but that's how I remember reading it. That's how it leaned.
It kind of felt more to me because they very specifically have like a rule of even in the writer's circle, don't bring up these two legions at all. That was supposed to be more a Russ was sent to deal with Imperial Army guys that had fucked up. Maybe I'm wrong. But interesting interpretation. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying,
I know.
I like it. I'm going to chew on it a bit.
I totally believe the wolves were designed for being the attack dogs to quell other legions.
And so were the Warhounds. So were the World Eaters.
So were the Warhounds.
Yeah, 100% designed to do as much damage as possible in a short period of time.
Sorry for the sidetrack, everybody.
That's what you do.
hey, I like the wolves, but then there's times
the wolves. I'm going to end up running Space Wolves because I decided that the easiest way to do my Kroot army is to use the Space Wolves rules and just, they're not space. The lore is different. But as I've been looking at that stuff, I've also kind of been like, the Space Wolves would be a fun kill team to put together.
So this could be something else, but the whole thing of Magnus did nothing wrong. Is it because of this message that he sent, or was it because of another reason?
It's because of this. It's because a lot of the argument is that Magnus was trying to save the Imperium, and because he was trying to save the Imperium, he was essentially executed. For lack of a better word.
I get it now, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of agree.
Yeah, no, Magnus is definitely a tragic figure. There are a lot of things that happen to Magnus that do not feel fair. They probably were going to happen anyway, but they don't feel fair, if that makes any sense.
He's literally the redheaded stepchild.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The symbolism.
I mean, come on. How much more symbolism can we get?
The Space Wolves traveled to Prospero at their full strength, for Rest knew that even without the aid of their sorcery, this was going to be the first fight between Astartes. And that is why I wonder whether or not the intention is supposed to be that he took another one out, because it very clearly marks that Russ felt that this would be the first full-on bout between two Astartes legions. He was worried about it.
On the record.
Allegedly
the first fight.
Non-allegedly. Not to mention that almost the entire strength of the Thousand Sons was already mustered on the planet. In support of the Space Wolves was a contingent of the Legio Custodes, given to Russ by the Emperor personally. So he was given essentially a battle group. A fleet of black ships were also accompanying them with strict orders to capture and return any non-Astartes psychers found on Prospero back to Terra. And finally, the Silent Sisterhood would aid the strength of their untouchable pariah gene. And finally, the Silent Sisterhood would add their strength of their untouchable pariah gene to the mix. Their presence as psychic blanks would act as an anathema to the sorcerers of Prospero, and the sisters themselves were essentially immune to warp sorcery. And the reason I say essentially immune is because it's the same D&D rules or the same normal magic rules. If you're immune to magic for some reason, that just means you can't be directly targeted. If I use my magic to knock a building over and it lands on you, you're not immune to the building falling over. And that kind of ended up happening in the fight when the sisters did get involved, is the sorcerers of Prospero realized, if I cast Fireball at this chick, it doesn't work. But if I cast Fireball at the tank next to her and it explodes and she gets showered with shrapnel, the shrapnel kills her. So keep that in mind. Blanks are not impervious. Blanks are not targetable, if that makes sense.
So it's like they can't be targeted by diarrhea, but you can give the custode next to her diarrhea.
And then she has diarrhea on her, and it's kind of the same thing.
And then she's grossed out and running away.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a weird analogy.
Wow. Voice to the toilet.
Nurgle's gifts.
That's how it works.
But
But being around a pariah, we haven't really talked about pariah genes yet and how all that stuff works, but being near a pariah as a psychic user is extremely uncomfortable. So it's kind of one of those, like, I don't want to be in the room with you. And depending on how strong you are, it could be, I don't want to be in the building with you or on the same block as you. So just the fact that the sisters ended up on the battlefield was uncomfortable regardless. This was the first true battle between Astartes warriors, as it was assumed Magnus wouldn't just give in. Not only would this mark one of the fairest fights the Space Wolves would ever fight during the Great Crusade, but the Thousand Sons had the home team advantage, and their world would be a veritable fortress against invasion. And on top of all of that, they were also master sorcerers. These were all of the things that Russ was worried about. But if you look at the tools that the Emperor gave Russ, the fleet of black ships and a bunch of other things, it's pretty obvious that the intent of the Emperor's message was capture, not destroy. And just want to point that out one last time. Magnus, however, for his part, had finally seen the error of his ways when his message had damaged the Golden Throne. He basically, he brute forced his way in, he gave his message, and then kind of in that post-nut clarity, he looked around with his psychic impression and saw the damage that he had done to the webway, saw the damage that he had done to the throne room, saw what was starting to happen, and was like, oh, fuck, I screwed up. He saw and identified how Tzeentch had been subtly manipulating him ever since Magnus had first used his powers to save his legion from the flesh change. He didn't warn his legion or the planet of the oncoming Space Wolves, and he used his psychic powers to blanket the world's advanced warning systems. He would wait for his punishment, which he now saw as just. Magnus essentially decided, I fucked up bad, I deserve to be captured and transported back to Terra along with my legion. We're not going to fight the wolves. We're going to take our punishment. Now,
so
Magnus
essentially
thought they were going to get yelled at, captured, maybe taken back. Like, he knew that people were going to die. He knew that there was going to be conflict, but he saw it more as like, you're going to get roughed up before you get handcuffed, not you're going to get murdered and then handcuffed.
So essentially, back to the zombie analogy, when you kick that door down, you kicked it down on top of the $7,000 big screen, which fell over and
oh my God, this is such a bad analogy.
Hit your dad in the ass.
Getting worse.
Which had him slip out and break his shit in half, and now he has to go to the ER, so he's extremely upset.
And you realize that you did all that wrong. He's actually so instead of running away,
he's crippled now for that coming fight.
The dad?
Yeah.
That's a weak argument to make. That is a very imperial argument to make.
Because his mast is broken.
Imperium's always right.
The conflict that's going to happen in 9 years from the moment that this happens, the fact that he couldn't fix it for 9 years is Magnus's fault?
Because, hey man, broken shaft, you don't know how long that's going to take to heal.
Exactly. I mean, when you got to pick up a baseball bat and you have to be leaning the wrong way to swing it because you're holding yourself up.
But again, as Chuck pointed out in his counter argument, if the Emperor just never fucked with the Golden Throne, none of this would have happened.
Mm.
If Magnus hadn't fucked with it.
No, if the Emperor had never fucked with the Golden Throne, then Magnus never could have damaged it, and the Golden Throne never would have been connected to the webway. And since the webway wasn't broken in several different places, allowing demons into it anyway, which the Emperor knew, you've gone back and been, if the kid didn't boil water, it wouldn't be a problem.
Exactly.
He just wanted some macaroni, dude.
Dad said,
it's not.
The dad literally said, hey, go sit on the couch. I'll be back in 15 minutes.
Yeah, because the kid wanted macaroni, right?
So I think you guys, I get the analogy that you're making, but the big takeaway here should
macaroni
be
and zombies.
That Magnus realized how badly he screwed up, and he was essentially waiting to get captured.
Oh yeah, I'm in total agreement on that. He knew he was a good son, all of a sudden waiting for his punishment.
He was always a good son. There was nothing bad about. Okay, I lied. He was not always a good son because he decided to keep doing black tar heroin when his dad told him to stop doing black tar heroin.
Exactly.
Hey, Marky, you want to start an Iron Warriors army with me just to fuck with Chuck? This Imperial fish shit's getting out of hand.
No, it's fine. It's good to have an opposing view on this, because I wasn't really for the Imperium or against the Imperium, but god damn it if I'm not starting to see the reasons why.
Oh yeah, no, it's well, and that's the thing that makes this setting, like, honestly, that's the thing that makes this setting so awesome. It's the reason that I like things about almost every single faction.
Yeah.
Is this constant, like, everyone has skeletons, no one's the good guy, everything's fucked up.
Yeah, and
I absolutely,
and everybody
it's
has good
so
reasons.
awesome.
Yeah,
And everybody has a good reason to be fucked up and
Well,
to be
From a
right.
certain point of view.
It's you have flaws and good things.
And the only good
except
guys.
for Kurz, that guy, I don't know about cockpiece Kurz. That's like, I don't know.
He's a little upset.
But just to not to keep derailing us, but do you think that's why a lot of veteran players steer away from the Imperium after a while? Have you noticed that? Like, a lot of people that first start playing the game, they're like, "Oh, the Imperium, they're so badass," blah blah blah, and then that's after you kind of, engulf yourself in the lore. You're like, "Oh man!" Like,
I'm sorry not to cut you off, but I think I get where you're going. For me specifically, it has very little to do with the lore, because a lot of times when we do deeper dives, and I know a lot of this stuff anyway, but I'm kind of going back into it, and I'm going a lot deeper into it because I'm checking sources and all this shit. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want a Space Wolves army. I get excited for them and want to do stuff with them. The end thing with me as kind of a veteran player is I've always liked aliens more than humans in sci-fi settings. Aliens have always been more interesting to me. I mean, my first army was Eldar, and I've never really been super attracted to just painting guys, but my second big army was Imperial Guard. So I don't know.
It has to do like what Ryan's saying. Like Ryan's probably drawn to the Guard because of history, right? He likes aliens. I'm drawn to Space Marines because of, like, Arnold's fucking Schwarzenegger I grew up watching. Why would I not want my hero to be some giant, massive dude just tearing shit apart with his bare hands?
So you should be playing Catachance. Yeah.
But I mean,
Like, right on the cue.
And look at me. I've started collecting Chaos. One out of the 4 Chaos gods, the one that appeals to me the most is Slanesh, right? And then I have a guard undivided, basically an undivided guard army for Chaos, because it's like
that's cool.
Everybody does guard. I mean, for the hobby aspect is why I'm going with the Chaos stuff.
I think that was the kernel that I was trying to get to. That the hobbyist side, like the artist side, there's a lot more options when you can just fuck around with, like, not the Space Marines.
Not sleek armor with just some purity seals.
That's why I chose Deathwatch, was for the
because you
the
get
customization.
You do get to do a lot of customization, and like there's definitely other Space Marine armies that you can do it with. The Space Wolves being one, lots of customization there.
What are those Falcon ones? I forgot what they're called, but they're the green ones that use camo.
Yeah.
The Raptors.
Raptors. There you go.
Raptors.
Yeah, they're like very tactical.
Yeah.
Tactical.
I mean, you can
I
still
love
do
that.
it.
Yeah, me too.
Those things are so fucking cool.
You can still do a lot of customization with regular Marines, but it's the whole. I mean, look at all the different stuff I'm putting on my Trader Guard.
Yeah,
it's just like all this crazy stuff. Well, it's not uniformed.
It's designing within a set of rules or designing with no rules.
Yeah,
and sometimes it's fun to design with no rules. But I don't know. I think a lot of it also comes down to, like, what you were drawn to as a kid. Like, I was drawn to elves and dwarves and stuff like that when I was a kid. And that's why I think Eldar was my first race. I am much more a dwarf person now in my older age, but in my younger age, elves were the shit.
I think that is a common theme. I think as you become a bitter old man, you realize that dwarves are
right.
better.
But I really do think
dwarves are right.
When you're hot and young and dexterous and agile, you're like, man, elves are pretty cool. I like being able to do dexterous shit. And then when you get old and you can't move as fast anymore and you're just grumpy all the time, you're like, yeah, you're fucking elves.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, I probably would have chose
I mean,
Slanesh as my first army if that was the case.
There are guys. I think so. You identified as a hermaphroditic sex monster with crab claws.
I just like titties.
I mean, I am the sexual Tyrannosaurus Rex.
But again, like when you were a little
it's
kid,
a sex machine.
When you were a little kid, there was an archetype to like fantasy stuff that you were drawn to. Some people like big knights, and some people like slender elves that shoot bows.
And I like
Marky
big
does
titties.
like big stuff.
I'm just kidding. No, when I was a kid, I was more sci-fi than fantasy. Fantasy didn't really kind of tickle my fancy.
Well, and you like Tyranids and you like Genestealer cult, so that's not super surprising. Like all and all the Xenomorph stuff that you do, even your Death Watch, you like your Death Watch because you can fight alien. Like a lot of your stuff goes back to that's what you chose. You chose the Xenomorph.
Yeah, the alien aspect of it, I agree.
The Battle of Prospero is a very lore-heavy event, and we have already spent a lot of time looking at everything that went down that led up to it. We have plans to cover major battles in their own episodes or series in the future, so for now, we're going to kind of hit all of the major points as a summary of what happened. There's a lot more to this event, but as we've mentioned in the past, and as you guys have already experienced with things like our Planet Spotlight episodes and our Heroes of 40k, we're going to do battles of as well. We haven't come up with a name for it yet, but it's definitely in our flow. We're going to do the Badab War as one of them. We're going to do probably the Burning of Prospero as a focus, where we actually get into everything that happened, because there's a lot of lore here. There's a book and a half of lore here. As we mentioned before, Horus at some point gets to Russ, and he changes the orders of the Emperor from capture to eradicate. So when they arrive and see the planet is basically in peacetime mode, Russ doesn't think, he acts. The Space Wolves and Constantine Valdor open up with an orbital bombardment, catching the planet completely unaware. Again, the only person who knows they're coming is Magnus, and Magnus doesn't expect them to bombard. He expects them to show up and arrest him. After softening the target and destroying massive amounts of settlements and large parts of the planet's only major city, Tizca, the Astartes and the Custodes land in force. And they basically used a rolling barrage, very similar to a World War I tactic, to advance on the city of Tizca itself. To explain a rolling barrage, artillery fire is designed to march just ahead of the advancing ground forces. It's basically a wall of fire and iron that chews up the ground, and just after that passes over you and you can breathe again and pop your head up to look around, the enemy troops are on your throat. That's the way that a rolling barrage is designed, and that's what the Space Wolves and the Custodes did. They sent rolling barrages up the beach toward Tizca, and literally out of the smoke of these craters came Space Wolves and Custodes firing from the hip.
That's pretty good, but also very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's incredibly... Yeah. By the time
it's like the original Blitzkrieg. It's the precursor to it.
There's a portion in the book that, knowing some of the World War I battles, like it reads
like
a World War I battle
after action report.
100%. You're just like, oh shit, that's insane.
Yeah. Where they like talk about the amount of shells expended, and you're like, yeah, that tracks.
I can't remember if it's Verdun or the other one, but there's one of the battles in World War I, more French soldiers died in the opening like 15 minutes of the artillery,
like 6 months of the campaign or some shit,
than all Americans have died in war in total.
Oh damn.
Yeah, it's
I remember it being massive, but I didn't remember it being that crazy.
Yeah, it's just an insane figure. And like
that's the same artillery barrage where you see the pictures of the shells, and it's literally like piled like a 3-story building.
It's like looking at the mountain of bison skulls that like Buffalo Bill is sitting on top. It's like it's so creepy to see that just amount. And that's what the Thousand Sons did. Or not the Thousand Sons. That's what the Space Wolves did. That's exactly what they did. It's devastating. And to a population that's not expecting an attack, it's got to be even worse.
Yeah.
By the time the Thousand Sons did start to openly fight back, as did by this time, the Thousand Sons had decided or were organizing and openly fighting back, as was the Prosperian Spire Guard. And this fighting gets brutal, dirty, and nasty fast. Magnus is staying out of it as he wars with himself and honestly with Tzeentch, who's in the back of his head, about how he should react. Magnus expected a fight and there to be open consequences, but he didn't expect that his sons and his world's entire population would be mercilessly slaughtered. When the battle gets deep into the city and city fighting conditions just get super nasty, with ruins of the once beautiful and relatively peaceful city of Zinka laying all about them, the Thousand Sons and Spire Guard actually do manage to turn the tides a bit. The Thousand Sons go fuck it, and they unleash their full powers against the Space Wolves and Custodes. The planet is lost, but maybe they can save the city, and some sort of portion or some sort of group of the population. They go into, how do we save as many of our people? Survival mode. How do we save as many of our people as we possibly can? However, this is when the Sisters of Silence decide to join the fight. And in this brief moment of we might hold them long enough to save millions, completely falls apart. Eventually, the survivors, about 1,000 of the Thousand Sons, and maybe a tenth of Zinka's civilian and mortal population, are all pushed back into the Pyramid of Hotep. And it's at this point that Magnus has finally had enough and joins the fight. When Magnus appears, he does so ready to fight toe-to-toe with Russ specifically, and he unleashes a gaze of pure chaos against all of the attacking Space Wolves. The power that comes from his one good eye kills everything it gazes upon, except for Russ and his Pharisian wolf champions. With these few seconds that Magnus has bought, he casts a spell to stop time, and he gives his final orders to Ahriman. And with this, Ahriman is now the guardian of the Book of Magnus. Magnus the Red and Russ duel. Magnus eventually loses. As he lays dying at his brother's feet, Magnus uses the last of his power to transport the City of Light, Zinka, from the surface of Prospero to the planet of sorcerers deep in the Eye of Terror. With this last bit of his will, his physical body is spent and dissolves, and Magnus then ascends to become the first demon Primarch, a demon prince of Tzeentch.
That shit is heavy as fuck, dude. Jesus.
Yeah.
I didn't know he died.
Yeah, Russ broke his back, right?
Yeah, Russ fucks him up.
Like literally, like suplexes him into the ground. Like it's fucking crazy.
Magnus also wipes out all of
like
Russ's forces in the city.
Yeah.
When he transports the city when he teleports the city from the surface of Prospero to the planet of sorcerers,
it kills everybody.
Russ is the only person who survives that. And Russ isn't teleported. Russ is still on Prospero, but none of the other enemies in the city survive that.
Because that's just too much psychic.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's crazy, dude.
It's glimpsing directly into the warp, and what does that do to the human mind?
It is a brutal it's a brutal fight.
So why did Horus decide to tell Russ, like, hey, this isn't capture anymore, this is kill?
Because he needed Magnus to fall to Tzeentch.
Yeah, because think about it. If he captures him and all the Thousand Sons go back to Terra, now the defenses of Terra are even better.
And then the Emperor can say, I need you to sit on the golden throne.
You're sitting here, I'm going to the front line now.
Yep.
So Magnus only fell because Horus essentially lied to
plotted it
Russ.
all.
So Horus is playing 4D chess. Everybody else is playing checkers. And this has been happening since Horus walked out of the lodge. The moment Horus was resurrected and walked out of the lodge and started being 5 psyches, 4 chaos gods and himself all in his brain, he started like plotting and planning at a level that no one can keep up with. Oh, that's
right, because Horus already died, and now he's already essentially an agent of chaos. Like there's no good in him left.
Yeah.
Does the Emperor know when essentially, like how, or will know that what happened to Magnus and why?
Yeah. So the Emperor finds out everything in the aftermath, and it's at that time in the aftermath that the Emperor sees essentially like. Russ is in trouble, but not in trouble enough to be dealt with, if that makes any sense. The events will not allow the Space Wolves to be punished for this, basically. Shit's already too off the rails at this point for the Space Wolves to be pulled from the fight and dealt with.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of them just died anyways.
Yeah. And the Emperor basically sees that Magnus was trying to warn him sees what's going on. But essentially everything that we talk about for the next like 2 or 3 events, all of this shit is essentially happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of these events are happening at once.
It's planned to happen at one time.
Yeah.
Fuck, dude. Yeah, like I see Magnus in a completely different light now. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I'm definitely a beaky boy, as in a Zinchian.
I mean, think about it. If Horus doesn't change the message, there's another outcome to the whole civil war.
Right.
The Emperor is able to be at the front lines. If Magnus does what he was designed to do, help guide humanity.
And under the leadership of Malkador the Sigillite, the Thousand Sons, the Legion, would become an unstoppable psychic army.
Oh yeah,
like the Grey Knights, essentially, right?
Like times 2.
Yeah, you wouldn't have the Grey Knights.
You'd have the Thousand Sons. Yeah, the Thousand Sons would sit on Saturn and would basically be the Grey Knights in a lot of ways. I mean, they would have gotten in a lot of trouble and had to write "I will not summon demons" 7,000 times on the board first, but in
the Emperor's powder room,
right? Detention. You're all going to detention. Yeah, it totally would have happened. But all right.
So how bad? Before we move on, how bad was the message being sent to the Emperor? Like you say, it fucked up the the webway and it fucked up the Golden Throne. And the demons are summoned. How bad was the outcome of that?
Let me put it this way. Forces are drawn to keep all that at bay, and the Emperor can't go deal with shit he needs to go deal with once he finds out about Russ and things going on. He can't leave the throne room.
One of the reasons that the custodes are bound to the Imperial Palace is because the Imperial Palace, as of this point, is constantly besieged by demons.
Actually, I thought I had heard somewhere that somewhere along the line they had managed to close it or something.
They do manage to close it, but essentially this is the reason that the custodes stop being deployed during 30K.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Valuable forces have to be drawn away to plug something that shouldn't have been opened.
And that was Magnus's fault?
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes.
The short answer.
Answer.
There's a lot more going on, but
okay.
The Blood Angels disappear en route to Cygnus 005.M31. The Cygnus campaign, also known as the Battle of Cygnus Prime, was a military action undertaken by the Blood Angels to cleanse the Cygnus cluster. This was a trinary star system in the Segmentum Ultima near the galactic core that featured 7 worlds and 15 moons, where humans were under the hellish rule of the Xenos invaders known as the Nephilim. Unaware of Horus's growing betrayal and his new allegiances, Sanguinius willingly obeyed his brother's orders and set off to undertake the task. Horus, meanwhile, had sent them into a well-laid trap, for Cygnus Prime itself was a hellish demon world under a greater demon of Slaanesh, Crisis the Perverse. There you go, there's your Slaanesh shit. Crisis the Perverse. Horus had come to hate and fear Sanguinius the most, as the two had been extremely close before the War Master's corruption, and Horus sought to kill or capture him. And this wasn't the first scheme, but ultimately all of these schemes ended up failing. However, this plan sought to exploit the 9th Legion Blood Angels' hidden genetic curse of the Black Rage or the Red Thirst, with the goal being to enslave them and their Primarch to the will of Khorn, the Blood God. But the Blood Angels would triumph and end up cleansing the system of the Cygnus clusters of demonic infestation, and so this latest scheme also failed, although it would remove and delay the Blood Angels from some of the coming events, and it would leave a dark stain on the Legion, as the effects and frequencies of the curse would get much worse from this point on.
It should just be the Red Thirst, though, shouldn't it? Because the Black Rage was essentially them reliving the death of Sanguinius.
The Black Rage and the Red Thirst at this point were used synonymously. They were not two different things.
That is a cool piece of artwork.
It's Sanguinius fighting a Bloodthirster.
And again, this novel is another good one. It's fuck. Did you read this one, Ryan?
I did not read this one,
but
I know a lot of the shit that happened in it.
All I'm gonna say is you gotta love certain characters. They're just like the ones that plot along and do their job, and they're not like what you picture to be a hero. End up becoming the hero.
Yep. Yeah, it happens a lot.
And it's fucking great. And then you get a mopey demon because of it. You get an Eeyore. You get an Eeyore demon because of it.
Well,
And
I guess I'll just go over to the
Yep.
high terror.
It's fucking great. I guess I'll take you, but you're not the one I wanted.
Yeah, but Horus had just become more and more paranoid of Sanguinius and just didn't trust him and kind of had started to resent and hate him because Sanguinius was treating Horus like his best friend still.
Yeah.
And Horus kept like sending him away and sending him into these really, really dangerous conflicts. And the entire point had been that Horus wanted Sanguinius to fall to Khorne. He wanted Sanguinius to become essentially Angron, or to side with Angron, because Angron had kind of already started going that way during all of this stuff. And it just, Sanguinius kept triumphing because Sanguinius is just too good of, at the end of the day, Sanguinius is just kind of too good of a guy.
This novel too really puts it like Ryan said. It gives you Sanguinius's personality big time. Oh, this is the book too when why he has a single tear tattoo.
Sanguinius has a tear tattoo.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's one of those novels where you're like, fuck that dude. Sanguinius should have been picked to be the War Master, not Horus. Just saying.
Yeah, well, the Emperor is a perpetual fuck up, so we know that's not going to happen.
You know why he didn't pick Sanguinius?
Because he's a perpetual fuck up.
No, he has wings.
Yeah, Sanguinius.
And what does the Emperor teach against? Mutations.
Yeah,
So the
Sanguinius had a
normal human-
relatively big mutation.
Yep.
So
So the
essentially
normal
it was,
human populace would be afraid of him.
So essentially, because of the Emperor's fuck up of letting him mutate and have wings, he didn't have him be the War Master.
Yep.
Hence, it's because the Emperor is a perpetual fuck up.
There
I
you
mean,
go.
that's just one of the multiverses that we're probably trapped in. So there you go.
Just it always circles back to the Emperor is just a fuck up.
I like this logic. The Ultramarines and elements of the Word Bearers are sent to muster at Calth 005.m31. You guys will notice that all of these events are happening in the 5th year of the 31st millennium, by the way. While the nature of the orders that led to the mustering is unknown, the truth behind these orders was soon to be realized, and that came with the Battle of Calth within the same year, 005.m31. The early stages of the Horus heresy are now well underway, and the forces that the War Master has gathered around himself are beginning to march toward Terra. With the Signet's campaign tying up the Blood Angels and Sanguinius, Horus looks to Logar and the Word Bearers to tie up Reboot Gilliman and the Ultramarines. Logar sets his Word Bearers to the task of completely exterminating the Ultramarines, using the muster of Calth to essentially launch an invasion on the realm of Ultramar. Along with Horus's plan, this would also keep the Ultramarines far away and tied up in protecting their own worlds, preventing them from being able to reinforce the Sol System and Terra itself during the oncoming siege of Terra. This conflict came to a head on the agri-world of Calth in the Ultramar sector, where the Ultramarines were able to eventually break the surprise assault led by the Word Bearers. However, this took a viciously fought and long siege action, which cost both sides terribly in casualties. Calth's atmosphere was also stripped, and the once verdant world's surface was completely destroyed. As a result of the devastation that the Word Bearers also brought during the Calth Atrocity, as it's become known, damage was done to the Verdian system's sun. The world was a verdant place, and the system was called essentially a variation on verdant. It was called the Viridian system. And they did so much damage to the Viridian system's sun, to which Calth orbited, that future generations of Calth are required to live in subterranean hive cities to escape the world's now radiation-scorched and airless surface. Calth was if there is a merge between Paradise World and Agri World, that's what Calth was. Calth was kind of like a glittering jewel of this system. And the Word Bearers fucked it up and then fucked the sun of the system up so much that Calth is too heavily populated and too useful to be abandoned, but completely incapable of supporting life on the surface. And the way that the word bearers led the attack was just devastating. During the muster, the word bearers and the ultramarines were like interlocked, interspersed with each other. Like their ships were essentially in tight formation next to each other. So when the word bearers attacked and the ultramarines weren't ready for it, it devastated the shit out of them. And then by the time they were able to reel and come back, the word bearers had embedded themselves on Calth. And the ultramarines essentially had to siege one of their own planets, and a planet that they highly prized, in order to like dig out the tick, if you will. And it fucked Ultramar. It fucked the realm of Ultramar pretty badly.
Yep. It's just Ultramar, though.
Stay over there, kids. And that's the other thing. Like, Horus is taking all of these steps to separate people. Speaking of that, the Istvaan 3 atrocity. This is when the Horus heresy is considered to formally begin, which is also in 005.m31. This is the first official event of the Horus heresy, while it still very firmly falls into the waning period of the Crusade. As we mentioned late in episode 3, the Istvaan system had fallen, becoming rebellious after its initial compliance. Still under the guise of the War Master of the Imperium, it therefore fell to Horus to retake the system in the Emperor's name. He had to go back, teach him a lesson, bring him back into compliance, because that was the rule of the Great Crusade. However, this provided Horus with a perfect opportunity to both amass the forces that were already loyal to him without suspicion, while ridding those same legions of those that were suspected to still be loyalists to the Emperor. By this point, 4 Space Marine legions had declared their involvement in Horus's rebellion: the Death Guard, the Emperor's Children, the World Eaters, and the Word Bearers. Of course, the Sons of Horus were also, by and large, with their Primarch. Horus had begun to play the legions like pieces on a Regicide board, clearing their way to Terra and the False Emperor, as the traitor legions had come to call the Master of Mankind in this period. As we just covered, the Ultramarines and the Blood Angels were tied up in other parts of space, separated by distance and dangerous warp anomalies. Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels had actually been assigned to join Sanguinius to deal with another part of the Cygnus cluster. So the Dark Angels are also tied up. The Night Lords, Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors, Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands were by and large occupied in ongoing conflicts that kept them from being involved. Don't worry, though, their time is either coming up, and they'll either be destroyed or corrupted, depending on what Horus can do with them. While the White Scars and the Imperial Fists were way too loyal and also way too close proximity-wise to the Emperor for Horus to chance any sort of communication. Not only were both in direct contact, but had major elements of their forces within the Segmentum Solar itself. And the Space Wolves and Thousand Suns, as we covered at the beginning of the episode, are otherwise occupied with the Burning of Prospero. This is all happening at the same time. Horus has just played everybody.
Almost like a sad fiddle.
Sad trombone noises. As much as a massive war fleet, as such, a massive war fleet made up of 4 legions was left to amass around Istvaan 3. The Sons of Horus, the Death Guard, the World Eaters, and the Emperor's Children. Although at this point, Fulgrim had been delayed, and in his place, Lord Commander Eliadon had brought a sizable chunk of the Emperor's Children with him. This was truly a massive force, being almost the entirety of 4 legions. At this point, legions are 10,000 Astartes strong, not to mention all of their accompanying Imperial Army forces and their Imperial Navy forces. These are massive fucking fleets. There's something like 8 or 9 battle barges that are going to be involved here really soon, which is just, it's a mind-numbing number if you think about how big battle barges are and the amount of devastation they can do. Because of this, Horus called the Primarchs Mortarion and Angron, along with Lord Commander Eliadon, to his flagship, the battle barge Vengeful Spirit, under the guise of strategic planning. But in reality, this was actually to serve 2 purposes. First, Horus was able to gauge face-to-face for the first time the loyalties of those who had sworn to his rebellion, offering a chance to communicate in person as a group for the first time. It kind of builds that like layer of trust that all of these different messages back and forth through political dealings and secondaries and, long-term astropath messages couldn't really do. He needed to shore that up. Secondly, it seemed that the others had all glimpsed some part of Horus's coming scheme, as they had each prepared a list of suspected Astartes forces that were still loyal to the Emperor and dispersed within their legions. These troops, which Horus could not trust, essentially made up about a third of each legion of those that were present. So of the 4 present, about a third of each Horus couldn't trust. And they were gathered in order to assault the planet. They were told they would form the core of an oncoming assault to bring the planet and therefore the system back into compliance. This would mostly be a drop pod assault with limited gunship or teleporter support, and only the Death Guard would be making planetfall with any of their vehicles. They were told they were the first wave, and they believed this. As the battle progressed, they were cut off from any support. Those who didn't die in the assault would soon learn the horror of Horus's plan to turn the planet into their tomb. This is another major and pivotal battle in the history of 40k. So at the risk of teasing yet another future episode, we'll definitely come back to the Istvaan 3 atrocity for a future deep dive. There is a lot of back and forth, several different hive cities, a lot of heroes.
A lot of heroes in this.
A lot of heroes in this. The Eisenstein, Nathaniel Garro takes the Eisenstein and runs at this point.
Let's just say it didn't go according to plan.
War on the surface of the world was brutal, and while the Titans of the Legio Mortis were in support, the supposed second wave nor any relief force ever seemed to actually show up. Other than the Legio Mortis, there was no support. There was like, oh yeah, they're on the way. They're essentially that like telephone game. Oh yeah, they're on the way. Oh yeah, they're on the way. Oh yeah, and they never showed up. When the forces on the ground,
customer support.
Yeah. When the forces on the ground of Istvaan had taken their objectives and the tide of the battle had finally begun to turn, all communication with the ships in orbit ended immediately. As soon as they stopped losing people, as soon as it was obvious that the Astartes forces on the ground had won without support, all communication, even the fake communication, had stopped. While the Titans of Legio Mortis had subtly been retreating and were now well outside of the city, the majority of the heavy fighting had focused on. So pretty much the entirety of the Istvaan 3 assault had focused on one hive city. And the Titan legions, the Titans of Legio Mortis being some force that had sided with Horus already, they backed off and they got far enough away and prepped for what was coming. The guys inside of these Titans survived everything we're about to talk about. High above the battle barges of the combined fleet, this is the Vengeful Spirit, the Firebird, the Indominus, the Killing Star, the Indomitable Will, the Gauntlet of Spite, the War Child, and the Conqueror entered low orbit, and then the saturation bombardment of the planet began. The payloads of these deadly bombs and shells was the Life Eater virus, one of the most terrible Exterminatus class weapons in the Imperial arsenal, a weapon only the Emperor and the War Master had the authorization to commit to force. In minutes, the Life Eater virus began to do its work, its necrophage infecting and destroying any living tissue, consuming everything in its path and leaving behind just fetid, rotting black sludge. Skin would slough off the bones of humans. Their screams of agony were only cut off seconds after their skin, organs, muscles fell off their bones as their lungs dissolved into boiling rot. The grasslands and the plains and the jungles of the world rotted, everything dissolving and bubbling as the world turned into a decaying, cancerous rot below the slowly orbiting ships. The entire planet, 8 billion souls, died. This released a psychic shock that caused even the constant beacon of the Astronomicon to blink momentarily. And that was not the end. The entire world and its atmosphere, pregnant with the gases of decay, was hit with a single lance strike from the Vengeful Spirit, which ignited it all, burning away whatever may have survived or remained. The entire landscape of the world was seared down to bedrock. The few Astartes warriors, the only ones on the planet who could have hoped to survive the virus bombing, had survived in airtight spaces, now found themselves desperately seeking cover once more, from wave after wave of hellish fire that tore across the planet. With that, the execution of billions and the reduction of Istvaan III to a dead world, Horus had finally showed his true hand in defiance of the Emperor. Don't worry, some did survive, but that is a tale for another episode. This is the battle where Loken loses his fucking mind, declares that he is a Luna Wolf, not a son of Horus, and then goes on a rampage murdering the fuck out of any traitor he can get his hands on.
Oh, yeah.
And it takes Dorn to rein him in.
Is this the battle that they have the YouTube video on?
I don't know. Is there a YouTube video?
I think.
Are you thinking the Battle of Hell's Reach?
No, I thought there was another video of the Istvaan massacre. Is that Istvaan 5?
The Istvaan 3 atrocity is very quickly followed by the Istvaan 5 Dropsite massacre.
Okay, I think.
And I'm sure there's a video on each of them.
A lot of people get them confused because there's very similar things happening in the same system.
So Istvaan 3 was the purging of the traitor legions of loyalist forces. And this, Chuck had brought this up last episode. These guys had been confused originally because, like, you know, out of a company of, you know, I can't remember how companies are split up at this point, but say out of 100 soldiers, Marines. Yeah, like 5 guys get pulled and put into a mixed unit with other guys. And they're like, well, why the fuck aren't we fighting with our unit? And it's because those 5 guys out of that 100 were suspected of being more loyal to the Emperor than any. And this was a lot of Terran-born Marines. A lot of Terran-born Marines were involved with this. And they were sent down to the planet with the entire point of Horus wanting them to lose to attrition.
This is a training action. Yeah.
Yeah.
Learn how to deal in ad hoc units.
And then the actual Dropsite massacre is the one where
we find out what legions are traitor or loyalist.
Yeah, and that's when Ferris goes from being the man with the iron hands to the man with no head.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
and both the Istvaan 3 atrocity and the Dropsite massacre are battles that we will cover in our battle series. In a lot more depth. And they happen
like basically simultaneously, don't they?
They happen back to back.
Like happen back to back,
yeah.
and both of them take longer, way longer than Horus wanted them to take.
Yeah. Horus wanted the Istvaan 3 thing to resolve itself.
Be done and over like in an hour.
Yeah. And it took I mean, it's brutal and it takes a bit, but like that, the fighting, the Istvaan 3 fighting had been resolved in something like 8 or 9 hours, which was like too long. And we'll get into the full details later, but it'd been too long for Horus to be comfortable with, but it had also put him into a position where he had decided to virus bomb the planet. Virus bombing the planet was not in the original plan, but Horus didn't take it off the table either. It's one of those like, I might do this.
Basically, what I'm getting at is the loyalist delayed stuff, and which delayed Horus going to Terra. Like it all adds up in the end.
Yeah,
like
every hour that they were able to delay him here is an hour that Dorn has to stack blocks on Terra,
which theoretically translates into a couple of weeks that they're slowed as they enter Sol System.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But
heresy, I promise you guys, the heresy is coming, listeners, the heresy is coming up. And I promise you we'll come back to some of these battles in an effort to talk about the events of the Great Crusade. We are laying stuff out in the broadest strokes we can without losing too much content.
Yeah. Because that's the great thing is how deep Warhammer is. But if you go too shallow to try to make sure you cross the whole pool, in a reasonable amount of time, then you didn't even swim in the whole pool. You just skipped across the surface.
Exactly. So one of those really big events that will definitely get a huge focus on its own is the Schism of Mars, which begins in 005 to 006.m31. Just as lines had begun to be drawn between the forces of the Imperium, dividing up the Astartes legions, the Imperial army forces, and the loyalty of the planets and systems themselves, echoes of the coming conflict started to ripple through the priesthood of Mars. Essentially, the Emperor and the Mechanicum itself had forbidden a huge chunk of history and even science from being investigated or explored, locking some of it away, ignoring other parts of it, or actively persecuting and eliminating those who dabbled in those taboo subjects. Factions existed within the Mechanicum that wished to explore these dark and forbidden arts, sciences, and histories, and Horus would use this to his advantage, making promises to unlock, find, return certain parts of knowledge, while also making assurances that under his leadership, the Imperium of Horus, these taboos and limits would be completely lifted. The Schism of Mars is a time period that parallels and in some cases even surpasses the events of the heresy itself. It's just important to note that the first shots of this oncoming conflict echo back to this time. With our next series, we'll be covering the heresy and the schism in more detail as we get closer to covering the Adeptus Mechanicus with our next faction focus.
After Schism, what Tool album are we moving on to next?
We're going to go back to Undertow.
Nice.
Good music reference, man.
You kept saying it, and I need to find a way to work in the reference.
I got to be kind of a music nerd twice. Although one part of my music nerddom didn't get recorded, but yeah, I love when I can kind of be a music nerd and a Warhammer nerd at the same time. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
The Dropsite Massacre of Istvaan 556.006.m31.
War is the crucible in which we burn, and the fires of battle is the past consumed and the future born on tongues of flame. No greater fire has there been in our times than the 3 bloody hours of the Dropsite Massacre. Maldacor the Sigilate, Regent of Terra.
Yeah, so there you go. That's how long the Dropsite Massacre was. 3 hours. Also called the Battle of Istvaan 5, this is the first battle of the rebellion, which came to be known later as the Horus Heresy. The Istvaan 3 atrocity was Horus's unmasking. No longer were the traitors acting in the shadows. The Dropsite Massacre is what defined the battle lines the legions would split across in the coming civil war. It's important to note that we focus on the Astartes and how they split and chose sides, because by and large, the entire expeditionary fleets would side with them. This means the forces of the Imperial Army, the Night Houses, Titan Legions, and other auxiliaries, more times than not, just sided with the Primarchs they had served for close to 200 years in most cases. Not only that, but quite often the planets those Primarchs had brought into compliance also sided with them, be it traitor or loyalist. So we're not focusing on the Astartes and saying that they're the most important because we're venerating them as we look at the lore. The fact is that
are the reasons for all that.
Yeah, that the troops just followed the Primarch. Whoever had been leading their expeditionary force was who they generally sided with. It didn't always happen. But most of the time, that's what happened. And we had covered this, I think, in episode 2 of the Great Crusade. When the Emperor pulled back, a lot of the troops stopped seeing the Emperor as leading the crusade and started seeing the Primarch they followed as leading the crusade.
And that's kind of how the whole going from being the Lunar Wolves to the Sons of Horus and all that.
Yeah, that's why a lot of them changed their names. The news of the Istvaan 3 atrocity reached Terra by way of the Loyalist Death Guard frigate, the Eisenstein, under the command of Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard 7th Company. With Horus's hand played, the Emperor turned the Primarch Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, to come up with a plan to deal with the War Master's seemingly, at this point, small rebellion. At this point, the full depth of the heresy isn't understood, and the idea of meeting them in battle, besting them, and having this sort of old school honor system come into play is still on basically everyone's mind, at least the loyalist side. The Emperor and Dorn even still think at this point that Horus can be saved and brought back into the fold. Basically, they think we'll go beat him up, we'll punish him, we will beat them in battle, and doing that, we will prove to them that the Emperor's way is right. They will rejoin, a couple slaps on the wrist, a couple Hail Marys, a couple Our Fathers, and then you're back in the force. They don't think at this point that it's as bad as it is. Because of this, the two forces meet to fight it out on the world of Istvaan 5, as Horus and his allies hold the Istvaan system as their territory. At this point, that's all they have. The assaulting forces of 3 legions, the Iron Hand, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, clash with the known rebel forces of the Sons of Horus, Death Guard, World Eaters, and Emperor's Children. However, the Loyalist forces are betrayed by the second assault wave, made up of the Alpha Legion, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, and a large chunk of the Word Bearers, who have been around the Sons of Horus the entire time. So there is a huge chunk of the Word Bearers that weren't involved with the Battle of Calth, because they basically have been hanging out with the Sons of Horus for like 25 years at this point. They've just kind of been attached to the Sons of Horus the entire time. Dorn had committed these forces to the fight, believing that those forces that he brought in were still loyal to the Imperium. So as the battle turned bad and the Loyalists broke against the fury of the traitors that they knew of, they withdrew to the forces they thought to still be their allies, and that's when the shit hits the fan. The Iron Hand, Salamanders, and Raven Guard were caught between the hammer and anvil of the traitor forces, which nearly destroyed all 3 legions. They would become known as the Shattered Legions, thereafter in reference to the horrible scope of their losses during the Dropsite Massacre. The victory on the side of the traitor legions also shattered Loyalist forces' strategies in the Istvaan system, which had been built on the idea of superior numerical advantage. Dorn had thought, these forces that I'm bringing in, the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, and the Word Bearers who have been hanging out with the Sons of Horus, who are now going, oh no, we didn't know this was going to happen. He was like, I don't need to send my guys. I don't need to send anybody else. I can quarterback this from Terra. The Istvaan system is not really that far away from Terra. It's near the core worlds, by the way. I can quarterback this all from Terra. It will be fine. We've got the numbers. And then as soon as it starts, it goes from, well, we've got 8 legions against your 4 legions to, oh, they've got 9 legions and I've got 3. And it happens in 3 hours. Yeah. And with that, the first stone on the path to Terra had been paved by the forces of Horus and his chaos allies. The galaxy would tremble and burn with the fires of civil war and rebellion for the next 7 years as Horus moved ever closer to his ultimate prize. And that wraps it up for our overview on the Great Crusade. As we mentioned more than once, this time period is packed with important battles and in-depth lore ripe for deep dives. We promise we do intend to circle back and come to more than a few of them. On that note, do you want to get into contact with us about the show or ask us about some bit of lore we missed, or maybe share your own short stories, homebrew lore, and spooky dookies? Reach us at email at underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com or jimdarkgaming@gmail.com.
You can also reach us through our community on Discord. There we chat about 40k lore, the hobby, tactics, Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy Battle, creative writing, video games, role-playing, and so much more. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or at www.underthehiveofmadness.com. Like and review us wherever you get your podcast fix. Our home is on Spotify, but you can find us on Apple, Google, Audible, and many more.
Support us through Patreon at www.patreon.com/underthehiveofmadness. Patreon members get access to video podcasts with minimal editing, so you can see our lovely faces and follow along with what we're looking at on screen. Plus, you get to hear our bloopers in real time, which usually just results in me not being able to read the words that I've written. All Patreon levels also get access to our quarterly painting contest. Plus, we have perks at higher levels, and we all encourage you guys to head on over and check that stuff out. Bulge's Sump Rack City, your best source for all things dripping in synth leather fashion, metal-studded deathcore, and the neon glow of synth punk rebellion. If you can't wear a squig-hide body glove, what can you wear? Always one step ahead of the Administratum, we are the ultimate sound of rebellion on the Pirate Vox Wave, 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio, reminding all of you Chemrats, Hive Mice, and some ghoulies to keep those dials fixed right here. Same ratty frequency for a dose of the same ratty-ass attitude. In the depths of an ancient forgotten kingdom, 4 ominous figures known as the Four-Armed Emperors rose from the shadows. With 4 elongated arms each, they roamed the night, their presence suffocating the air. One by one, the kingdom's inhabitants vanished, leaving behind only whispers of their fate. Those who dared to venture near their domain could hear the bone-chilling sound of scraping metal as the Emperor's clawed hands reached out to claim the next victim. And as the moon's pale light bathed the land, the only evidence of their existence remained: a trail of severed limbs, a macabre testament to their reign of terror. Motherfucker.
I like it. That's pretty good.
That was actually really good, Jed.